Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome, everybody, to Nightlight. I want to thank Ken Quiethawk for his amazing introduction, as usual. Please check him out on the internet, look for native storytellers, and learn a lot about our history. I'm really excited about my guest today. I have Dr. Andrew Silverman with me, and he is a leading scientific expert on the Shroud of Turin, a medical doctor with a background in physics. And for over 30 years, he's been conducting research on the mind-matter continuum, near-death experiences, and the Shroud of Turin. He's presented his findings in peer-reviewed scientific papers and at international scientific conferences. He has a wonderful book out, and I highly recommend it to everybody, called A Burst of Conscious Light. It highlights the threat to human survival posed by artificial intelligence and shows consciousness could never be manufactured or uploaded into a machine. He brings together evidence from quantum physics and near-death experiences to show that consciousness is fundamental and not the product of a physical brain. Welcome to the show, Andrew. I'm so delighted that you're here, and I can't wait to get into some of the material you presented in your amazing book.
That's great. Thank you very much for having me on the show. Very happy to be here.
Well, your book talks about consciousness, and so many of us, we throw the word around, but I don't think that people understand exactly what consciousness is. And to get into all of this material, I'd like to go back to the very beginning, to before the beginning, and explain how we evolved from a light. And we are a part of the light. So can you go back to before the Big Bang and kind of bring us forward,
Sure.
within the 2-hour limit we've got?
Of course. I mean, basically, when one tries to define consciousness, there's always one always has the problem that whenever you define something, you define it in terms of something else. So you could define a glass as a receptacle that you can put liquids in and so on, and because people know what a liquid is and they know what that means, that they understand what you're talking about. But the thing about consciousness is that you can't define it in terms of any things, because it is in a way the complete opposite to thingness, to being something. You see, the other thing is that people tend to confuse consciousness with the contents of their consciousness. So as one looks around the room and sees the various objects and people around you, then your consciousness includes that awareness of what you're seeing. But your actual consciousness is more than just the contents of what you're seeing. It's the fact that you exist in order to perceive that. And so as all the listeners are themselves conscious. They know what consciousness is, but you could never define it in terms that, say, a machine could understand, because a machine cannot be conscious. So in terms of the question regarding going, I would say, rather than before, maybe I'm a bit pedantic, I would say beyond the Big Bang, because so what we're looking at here is one has to consider the nature of time to understand beginning. And it was the Nobel laureate quantum physicist Erwin Schrödinger who pointed out that actually consciousness, the mind, is always now. The laws of physics don't define a moment called now. The laws of physics have the Big Bang going right through to the heat death at the end of the universe. All could be together in one big glob of existence, past, present, and future. But as conscious entities, conscious beings, we are always now. And therefore, because it is only because of consciousness that there is a now, it's only because of us that there is time. And therefore, as Schrödinger also observed, consciousness is the creator of time, so consciousness cannot begin or end in time. It cannot be created or destroyed. So we didn't begin, but the universe did begin at the Big Bang. What that implies is that what began at the Big Bang is not our existence, but our separation from each other. In other words, that beyond the Big Bang, we are all one. It's analogous to the closest way we have of perceiving it. It's what people perceive in their near-death experiences when they see a bright light. And in that light, it appears to be all compassion and all knowledge, and they feel loved by that light, and everyone is one in that light. So I suppose you could say then that our origin is the state of all being one, but we have become, I wouldn't say evolved, we have become diminished in as much as we are less than that. So each of us has individuality in separation, and space, time, and matter are the map of that separation.
What caused that? I mean, did that oneness, was there something in that oneness that said, I want more, or what? In other words, was that?
Well, it's.
Yeah,
it's actually, I would say.
I'm struggling too.
Okay, I would say actually it's not more. What we are is less than that oneness, and the oneness being beyond time doesn't change. It's still there now. That oneness is timeless, but time began in the separation. And yes, as you say, we have freedom of choice, and there's never, if there were a fixed defined reason why a particular choice was made or had to be made, then it wouldn't be a free choice. So it's in the very nature of choice that there can be choices can be made that don't achieve anything for the good or betterment. People make mistakes all the time, and they cause harm to their fellow human beings from time to time, and so on. So it's not that the case that every choice we make is part of an evolution or of betterment. And I would say that the choice, that the one thing that can't know as the all and all knowing and all one is you cannot know ignorance, you cannot know separation, you cannot be less than the all. But in terms that possibility, because if there's perfect freedom in the perfect state of all knowing, then that allows for a choice to be made for something less than that state to happen, and that is what we have made happen, if you like, in making physical universes. We don't make the oneness, the light of all being, that never diminishes because it's beyond time. But we, if you like, rather than that, we make shadow we make something that is less than light, and that's matter, and space and time happen as a result of us becoming less. But I think the point was that throughout history there have been people who have taught that this physical universe is a state of being separate. That, for example, as Jesus put it, that this is a world where there's moths and rust and thieves and everything breaks down. But he highlighted that there was a recipe, if you like, to regain our original state, and the summary of that recipe is love your neighbor as yourself. That we've become physical, we've become separate, we've become enforced physical material beings because we've become less and we've become separate, and we've identified as self and through selfishness and materialism. And that creates a universe where everything left to itself breaks apart. But once we recognize that we have the same origin, all sentient being has the same origin as each other, as the one, then living out of that recognition is recognizing that our neighbor is ourself, and loving the neighbor as oneself is, as people like Jesus and the Buddha and many others have demonstrated, that's the recipe that removes our ignorance, the blinkers that narrow our perception and vision, and helps us regain the all, to become the all again.
How does it happen that throughout time there have been individuals that seem to have this oneness within them to a higher degree than others, and they seem to, be living examples of a philosophy or a belief system or whatever you want to, not a religion, but a way of life that is so different from the rest of us? How does it happen that scattered through time are all of these individuals? Was it a choice? Or certainly there is no, it's not random. I know it's not random.
No, definitely not random. Yes.
But how does that occur? Sure.
Their way of being is, if you like, the natural way of being. We have become less than that through becoming more ignorant and limited and restricted. And if we have no beginning, then you have to ask, where do we go when we die? And also, where were we before we were born or conceived? And there's a lot to be said for the notion of reincarnation as a mechanism through which that happens. So it may be that we have sort of built up our ignorance and prejudices and so on through many lifetimes of becoming less, and then the people come to and sort of show us a better way, who have not accumulated so much shadow, if you like, so they can be truer to the light. And in some cases, it can be to the extent that for example, David Bohm, the quantum physicist, pointed out that matter is frozen light, and that people, if they can be unenforced, can have enough peace and love, in other words, unionizing power, then the atoms may begin to unfreeze slightly, so that they could actually shine. It's like, for example, the Buddha is often depicted with light around him, and Jesus at the Transfiguration was seen to shine. And of course, as you say, it appears that the image on the Turin Shroud was actually formed by a burst of light that came from his body.
Well, it's many people. I refer to the fact that we have a crystal, a spark, a flame of the infinite, and or the creation or the creator that rests within all of us. And I believe in reincarnation, so that makes a great deal of sense. How, depending upon your experiences in the past, it influences your perception of your present and possibilities for your future. My late husband and I interviewed a lot of people that had had near-death experiences, and one of them that I found most moving was she talked about how she, once death occurred or near-death occurred, she felt herself being drawn forward towards a light, and she said, you have to understand, it wasn't that I was surrounded by light, it wasn't that I was cradled by light, it wasn't that, that I was getting loving feelings from out there. She said, I wasn't going towards it, I was it. So that she recognized that she was being drawn towards a source that she was a part of, which, I mean, when she said, I was the light, all I could think of was once you shed the one person called it the prison of the human core. You do become what you were before you came in, which would be pure light. So
well, I suppose the question is how do we live during our life? I think what we become once our body dies is in a sense subject to our own choice making mechanism and the decisions that we make and who we are as people, as shown by how we live. So if someone did live a life that was purely out of compassion and like some of these great teachers that we were discussing, then yes, it is possible to become the light. Whereas if we keep making more shadow, then we will still perpetuate that shadow and lesser until we dissolve that away again. I mean, a lot of people in their near-death experiences, in their what's known as the life review, they experience, they don't feel like they're being judged, but they look through their life and they see everything that they did from the perspective of the other people that they interacted with. So if they were being kind to people during their lifetime, they feel as though that kindness is coming to them. Whereas if they had been cruel to others, they feel that negativity in themselves. And so in that sense, we only would become purely the light if we are not at all shadow, if we're totally beyond all restrictions and limitations that divide one human being from another. We'd have to be completely beyond materialism, selfishness, racism, anything that divides human beings, to be able to be congruent with that light.
Well, as pure consciousness or pure light or spirit, and I refer to it as spirit, but that's just semantics. We don't have the ability to experience a physical existence, and in that physical existence, a lot of the situations, I mean, as quote unquote pure light, pure spirit, you're not going to have the ability to experience war, sadness, grief, joy, whatever. So that the physical form is imperative for the understanding and the growth or the wisdom of the light that's within you. Is that appropriate?
Well, I mean, my personal view on it is that physicality, that there's nothing worth knowing, if you like, that can only be known in a physical separate universe. That the physical separate universe is defined by ignorance. That all knowledge and all compassion is contained in the original oneness, the as you call it, the source state that we come from. and this physical universe is a universe which we exist in because we've become less than that. So I don't, if it's beyond, if the state that we've come from is beyond time and beyond all limit, then I don't think anything outside of it is an improvement on it or an evolution from it, because it's already perfection. It's already beyond time. It doesn't have need of change. Whereas we, because we've become limited and restricted, then we need change in order to undo that restriction to become like the original state.
Well, if indeed there is reincarnation, and again, I do believe in it, what is the point of physical reality if when we leave it, we become one with the whole again?
You see, I don't think we do necessarily. It depends what you mean by leave it, of course. When we die, I don't think we're necessarily leaving the separate state of existence that we are, in a sense, residing in now. If we still have those momentums that make separation within us, and we're still, as I would say, stuck here. You know, they have this idea in the Eastern Hinduism and Buddhism of the wheel of rebirth is what one is caught in until one obtains release from it through enlightenment, and then you don't need to have a physical birth again.
Okay. It doesn't make sense to me if we come from perfection. Once we separated from the whole, from the source, what is the purpose of a physical existence when we have purity inside of us already?
Right, we have purity. We have light inside of us already, but we also have shadow from our ignorance. So we can, in terms of purpose, you could say that's a value judgment of what someone considers to be their purpose. But if your goal is to achieve that state that you came from, then the purpose of a physical life is to live that change. As Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change that you want to see in the world, so that as a living human being, we have a chance to make a difference through how we live, because there is so much pain and suffering in the world, and that's not, I don't think, by design, by that it's sort of, that suffering is a punishment or imposed by some kind of creator God, but that suffering exists because we've become less than our full potential. You know, like the saying goes, that this is a world where there's moths that and rust that corrupts and thieves that break in and steal. But there's another way of being where there's no moths or rust or thieves. There's an eternal state of existence that we can achieve, and people like Jesus and the other people like him throughout history have shown us how rationally we can achieve that state.
It just, I think at one point you do say that humans created time, and
we are making time now. Every single moment we're making time through. Yeah.
So that we have created an amazing school, if you will, that we can work out the kinks in, I guess. And
sure.
And
well,
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that we've actually made is we've made, because we've made ignorance. Now we've got something to learn our way back to where we came from. If you see what I mean, But the actual that oneness, that source state beyond time, that's not something that needs to be improved. It doesn't change. It's because it's beyond time. It's already limitless. But we have made limit, and so because limit exists and separation and suffering and so on exists in this world, then we have an opportunity to make things better. We have to make ourselves better, to learn. We've created it by becoming ignorant. We now have the capacity to learn. But there is another way of existence that doesn't have ignorance, but we are within that ignorant state, and so learning is what we need to do if we want to, in our current state, for humanity to survive as a species and not sort of blow itself up or find some or make some kind of calamity happen, but then to build on that existence through learning and through respect for all of each other, and understanding the value and limitless preciousness of each and every human being, so that we live our lives valuing all of each other, and then in doing that, if we do it to the nth degree, completely, then we would be achieving what the teachers of the past were referring to as our potential.
Well, there was a time before technology started in, the technology like we've got today, there was a time when there was an innocence to humanity, and there was the sharing, and there was the loving, and there was the compassion, and then as they evolved, and some look upon that as, an improvement, and others not, but as the technology became more and more a part of our lives, the sweetness of humanity became less and less.
Yes.
So are we on a path? Are we on a pathway that technology can be our undoing, so to speak? I mean, according to some scientists, I'm not sure which branch, but the Earth has gone through at least 5 extinction phases. And could we be heading for another mass extinction so that we can start over again and maybe not discover technology to this degree?
Well, I don't. If we head for an extinction, I don't think it implies that there's some great plan that it's supposed to happen because something good is happening. I think that there is the likelihood that if things don't change, that Lord Martin Rees, the astronomer royal in the UK, recently wrote a book called Our Final Century, in which he posited that the 21st century could be the last century of living sentient humanity. That there's in the UK, we've got in Oxford. Oxford University has the Future of Humanity Institute, and in the University of Cambridge there's the Centre for Study of Existential Risk, of which Martin Rees and Stephen Hawking were members, and a lot of the people in both these institutions were saying that there's a very real danger that humankind could become extinct through the unanticipated consequences of technology, and for example, there are some obvious examples, such as the sort of automated autonomous weapons and so on. But there are other ways that, for example, if people were to try to, in an increasingly robotic world, if they were to try to create things that were there to prevent human suffering through so-called artificial intelligence, that you program it to prevent human suffering, and to a machine, to a robot, the most logical way of preventing all human suffering is just to wipe out all human beings, because if they're not there, they're not going to suffer. So, that's just sort of one extreme example of it, but also because people are losing sight of, as you said at the start, losing sight of what consciousness is, and they're confusing the state of being conscious for the information or contents within that consciousness, then people think that they are just some kind of software or program in the brain and think that they could upload their minds into a machine. I show in the book how, that's completely not possible, that we're not just strings of ones and zeros. But if people did start to believe that in sufficient numbers, and you get more things like transhumanism and trying to do mind uploading, then human beings would seem to become superfluous, surplus to requirements, and people would say, my body's getting old now, I'm just going to put my mind into this machine, and then my body can be disposed of. And actually, what they're actually doing is handing a death sentence to the human species. Now, people like Stephen Hawking and Martin Rees have argued that if we did have contact with an extraterrestrial intelligence, it would probably not be something that was living in the organic sense. It would probably be a machine. It would probably be artificial intelligence, because the actual duration of organic living intelligence, once advanced technology happens, they were saying would be quite a short one, because it's not long until humankind or its equivalents on other planets gets replaced by machines. See, so in the book I actually make a case that artificial intelligence is in many ways a contradiction in terms, because you can never make a machine that's going to be conscious. All it's doing is artificially processing information. But although it's not truly intelligent, it is still potentially deadly, and it could be that will be the reason for a possible extinction of the human race. But people can stop that from happening. That's because we have free will. We can resist. We can say no. We can value and cherish humanity and each other, and say that that's the most important thing, not machines and matter.
I think the other thing that you bring out too is that most of us look upon the earth and humanity as all there is. But when separation happened, it didn't happen just in this little part of the galaxy or the universe. So that out there must be billions of other entities that experienced the separation too, and evolved through time into other forms that may well have gotten it better than we did.
Well, there may well be other life forms. Now, in terms of evolved, I think it's more likely that something called devolution happens. That from, as you were saying, that in the past the people before technology, they had more of a sense of each other. So people may say that we're evolving as we become, in quotes, developed and so on. But actually, we're actually becoming less in terms of our human capacity. And it's interesting that actually, if you look over the last few thousands or even tens of thousands of years, people would assume that, for example, the human brain has been growing. It hasn't. It's actually been shrinking as time has gone on. If you look at the sort of paleoanthropologists will back this up, that if you go back to Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal man, they actually had larger brains per body size than we do.
Well, actually, in this case, does size really matter? Because it's said, and again, I can't quote from where, but that we only use about 6% of the capacity of our brain. So that something like 10% of the cerebral cortex, or at least it would seem that is the case from certain cases where people have had hydrocephalic people who only have a very tiny slither left of their cortex, which is the part that is more distinctly human, and in many cases, went on to get very high
highly qualified degrees and so on, and didn't have any notable sort of handicap or despite the fact that they were only actually had a tiny proportion of their brain left. But it may be then that in the past our ancestors might have used more of their brains than we do, because evolution doesn't make anything that in case you might need it in the future. So it may be a remnant of the past.
Oh, that's sad. I would love to believe that we have the tools and the gifts inside of us to utilize those gifts and talents that I believe personally lay dormant within us, like telepathy.
Yes.
Like even levitation. There's so many different gifts that have been demonstrated by these teachers that have been amongst us, and all of them really suggest, you can do this too. It's just a matter of
absolutely.
So that if we could utilize what we've got instead of building machines that might replicate it, we'd be better off.
That's right, indeed. And although that isn't actually about using parts of the brain, but I put it this way in the book. In fact, this was a point I made twice. Once when the first professor of parapsychology came to give a talk at my university when I was a student around 30 years ago. There was a question time he'd been in his public lecture there. He'd been talking about the evidence for extrasensory perception and mind over matter, from experiments on telepathy and psychokinesis and so on. And at the end, I just raised my arm and said, actually, when the chairman, said it was my time to speak, I just made the point that actually any human being making any action at all is using the power of mind over matter. So there's people, doing all these complicated experiments to see whether a spoon can be slightly bent or whether you can influence a random number generator or so on. But what we're missing we're missing the elephant in the room, that actually people talk about extrasensory perception, but senses don't perceive. Your eyes don't see, your ears don't hear, neither does your brain see or hear, in as much as there are electrical signals in there, but that doesn't in itself sort of invoke a consciousness to experience it. So all of our experience is beyond the senses, and all our action, every time we use our free will to make a decision and make an action, that is mind over matter. So I think that once we recognize that every single human being that we see walking along the street, they have a power that's bigger than the whole physical universe in terms of just dead galaxies and piles of gas and stars and black holes and all of that. All of that is just matter, just following the laws of physics blindly. Whereas each human being is such an amazing being, because they actually have something that can intercept that and make change happen of their own volition through free will, and that is the power of mind over matter. So I think that actually, when people talk about, for example, because the book mentions a lot about the Shroud, so the subject of Jesus comes up, and people talk about his miracles. To me, I don't use the word miracle, but all of those things that he did were the power that he had to do them was simply the power of his pure compassion, that people were hungry, and so food could appear because he cared so much about that. Every single one, if you look at all of the things that he did that were called miracles, every single one was the response of a compassionate human being, in other words, him, to a need that he saw in the people around him.
Well, what about people like the Buddha, who when he came upon a raging river and everybody was trying to figure out how to get to the other side, everybody looked around and he was already on the other side. That's teleportation. Jesus with walking on water, is that an element of knowing something and then doing
well,
it?
yes, I think if you go back to that story of when he walked on the water, if I'm not mistaken, that was his friends had gone out in a fishing boat, and they were caught in a storm, and there was a real danger that they could be capsized, and he wanted to help them, and so he walked towards them. There happened to be water there, but he just went straight over it. Now that's interesting because if you look at the image on the shroud, it appears that at the very moment that the image formed on the shroud, that actually his dead body had shifted. It was no longer lying flat on the slab, but it was actually upright. Because you can tell that because the hair is hanging down on the shoulders, not behind him, and the back of the body is not around the buttocks, and the calves is not flattened. So it's actually his body was upright, and then so you look at the position of the feet, thinking, oh, how was this body somehow standing? But no, because the feet are on different levels. It looks as though he was actually suspended above the ground, and this is the point that if one is sufficiently clear and pure enough in lack of shadow that limits that light that can come through human beings, then the very materiality of the atoms themselves can begin to unwind and become lighter, and that's how the Buddha, in the example you gave, was able to rise above the water, as was Jesus, as was Peter, and someone called Teresa of Avila, I understand she used to float above the ground sometimes. Jesus himself actually said that all these things you see me do, and I think you were alluding to this earlier, all these things you see me do, you also can do. That anyone is capable of doing them. But the most important thing that he was doing wasn't to turn water into wine or to rise above the ground. It was his power of compassion, and that's what was the key to him being able to do those things. But the things themselves were very much incidental. I don't think it was about the spectacle of showing these magnificent things. The magnificence was in how much he cared.
I would totally agree, and I think that goes for almost every teacher out there.
Yes.
That it is the element of unconditional love that enables this process to happen, and it's fascinating in that finally science is at a place where it is recognizing that these things happen and trying to understand why and how, so that science is not just chalking these things up to crazy people, but looking at them. Near-death experience, is one of the things that I'm so glad that science is paying attention to, because among other things, it's happening with doctors, so that and it's not a matter of the brain being a part of this whole process, because near-death experiences often take place when the brain is no longer functioning. So it can't be the brain that is doing this. So that
quite right.
So the physical body is just a vehicle wherein the spirit dwells for a period of time. Sort of.
Yes.
And it to me is and the element of miracle. I mean, I understand why people use it, but it's a matter of fact, and probably has been throughout all of time. And near-death experiences probably have happened since the beginning of time. But it's just at this of course, also in England. I mean, the insane asylums were full of people that were having near-death experiences and all sorts of other things, and they just were declared out of their minds.
I think partly the reason why near-death experiences have become what would normally have happened, that in the process of dying, one might have experienced that light and the life review, but then not come back to tell the tale about it until you're reincarnated, and then you don't remember it. But what's changed in around the 1960s is that cardiopulmonary resuscitation began to happen, and then defibrillators and so on. So people were brought back more frequently from cardiac arrest, and these are often the people who have the near-death experiences. So ironically, the fact that we have technology and using that technology in this instance, possibly in a good way, I think. Well, I'm a medical doctor myself, so I'm not totally anti-technology. If it's always the human being is the priority, not the machine, then it can be used to good effect.
Well, when I've spoken with people that have had this kind of experience, what I have found with, I'd say like 97%, maybe greater, but I'm going to allow for some not. Most of the people who have experienced it come back with a sense of love and compassion for humanity that goes beyond what they had beforehand. They want to serve, they want to help, they want to take care of. I've spoken to, it matters not their age or their philosophy or their religion. It's a matter of they've experienced something that has awakened within them a knowingness that changed their life.
In fact, the scientific studies that have been done by people like Peter Fenwick and Pim van Lommel and so on, show that there's no correlation there between religious beliefs and whether people have a life-changing experience. That people can be an atheist or they can believe anything, but what happens in the near-death experience isn't a matter of belief. It's a matter of direct experience, that they see something, they experience this for themselves. And once they've done that, then no one can tell them it's not real because they've been there.
Exactly. And it does make you think. Enough of this is going on, so that it has to be filtering into everybody. Near-death experience is now no longer something that people frown upon or jest about. They believe it, and
more people do. Yes, I think that's right.
So that there is hope for all of us. This book, your book is so important, actually, that it feels like you were compelled to write it. Was there a special reason behind your writing the book?
Well, actually, these are things that I've been thinking about for years. In fact, for decades, and I feel like because when I have discussions with people, sometimes with eminent scientists about these questions about consciousness and how it relates to quantum theory and so on, and I test these ideas out, and so far nobody has because obviously I'm just as fallible as anyone else, and I want to learn as well. So I'm looking for logical flaws so that I can improve on it. But so far, no one has pointed out anywhere along the line of logical derivation that there's a mistake. It does seem to hold water, and so I just feel I have a responsibility. If it there's a possibility of it being right. I can't know for sure, but it looks like it is to me. Then I have an obligation to get it out there for people to be able to read it and consider it for themselves, and hopefully I'll learn something from some of those readers who will come back at me with their own new insights and maybe write their own books that I can learn from. So I think all of us learn from sharing knowledge. This is I was saying that the best way to learn is to teach.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I taught school for 25 years, and learned more by teaching than I did from going to school. So, and it's always a challenge when you're a teacher to find a new way, a new perception, a new approach to get a point across, or to open a door to awareness of on a greater level. So, but I find what you have here is just so it separates knowledge from consciousness, and I love that, because there is a difference. You know, you can read books and you can have facts and you can have libraries, but unless there's a knowingness inside of you, it doesn't mean anything if you're not using that wisdom to facilitate greater growth within yourself. So it to me, your book makes it so very clear that we have power inside of us that we tend to not draw on, because we have been taught that we don't have that power. And so it is creating, you don't like what's going on, then change it. Change your perception and work towards something else. Don't be a victim. Be someone who is a pathfinder and finds new ways to approach things in a different way. We do have free will. We can choose to be a victim, or we can choose to be someone who is a trailblazer. And in blazing those trails, we open all sorts of doors to other elements within our reality. But I love the way that you spoke of the we chose to be separate, and there was a. Do you have any? You know, was there a purpose behind being separate?
You see, this is the point about free will that people find understandably difficult to fathom. Is that whenever anything happens, then we look for a cause of why did that happen. But by its very definition, and I go into this in depth in the book, the nature of free will is that there cannot be a final cause of why anyone ever has to make a particular choice, because there would be a contradiction in terms there, because if they had to make that particular choice, then the will isn't free. So by its very nature, if the fact that will is free means that there doesn't have to be a purpose behind our actions, and you know, unfortunately, we make mistakes, and in a sense, having been caught in this physical universe, one could argue might be our biggest mistake, that we're caught by our ignorance and limitation. And by ignorance, I don't mean ignorance of facts or academic knowledge. I mean ignorance of each other as valid, limitlessly valuable beings of that each human being has limitless potential. So if you take that on a spectrum, there have people like Jesus and the Buddha and others like them at one end who, you know, radiate pure compassion, and then the other end would be a psychopath, someone who has no sense that, as far as they're concerned, other human beings are just piles of flesh that have no meaning or value to them except what they can use of that person for themselves. And so and in not being at the light, in having shadow, we're within us of limitation, of restriction, of division, and so on. We're sort of some way along that spectrum, away from the light, and yet there is a way that we can get closer to it, and that's what people realize in their near-death experiences and so on. That in that light, we are all one. So it's all about compassion and recognition that not just we are that light in potential, but that every other human being is, whatever their gender, race, religion, whatever. That all humanity is limitlessly valuable.
Well, in the separation, because of free will, didn't we have the free will to choose to be in the shadows And by choosing to be in the shadows, we created situations where we could find pathways back to the light.
Well, in a sense, it's just that if you get lost, if you can retrace your steps, you can find how, not so that you could unlose yourself, if you see what I mean. Otherwise, the simplest way to do it is not to get lost in the first place. So yes, it is. The potential is there for us to regain what we had, but I don't think that you could say that we've lost it so that we could regain it, because it's not so that anything, in the sense that there was no final reason that it had to happen, but except that choice made it so. That we made it so. We have made our own destiny in that sense, and each other's. That everything is interconnected. That so a lot of what happens is because we've made a world of separation, then chaos goes together with that. So the butterfly flapping its wings in the Amazon that makes a storm in Florida, it's choosing to flap its wings, but it's not choosing to make a storm. It doesn't know about storms, but the storm happens because it flapped its wings. So you see, that's the thing about chaos and consequences, that not everything is chosen. The fact that we exist in this physical universe makes us subject to chaotic things happening and things going wrong and so on. But there is a simple path that we can follow, that has been shown to us as a species, that to recognize and value ourselves and each other sufficiently so that we don't have to be part of this physical universe anymore, that there's a way of existing beyond matter.
If everyone got to that place, then would this physical existence disappear?
Well, yes. I mean, that's what, in fact, many people are surprised to know that that's actually what quantum mechanics says. That there's a talk that done by, well, it's actually in his book that he wrote, a gentleman by the name of Andre Linder, who's a professor of physics at Stanford University, and he basically, if people can find this talk, I actually reference it on a link to it on the website andrewsilverman.co.uk, a talk he gave on a channel called Closer to Truth, where he makes the point that actually the equations of quantum physics, when you apply them to the whole universe, would mean that nothing happens. The universe doesn't begin and the universe doesn't change unless or until there is an observer there to make it happen. That the observer makes there be time. If there's no observer, if there's no consciousness in the universe, in other words, if we and all like us were not caught here, and so there's no observer, then there's no time, and so the universe ceases. It can't be unless it's observed. Okay.
So in order to observe it, does there have to be physicality?
Yes. Well, you see, physicality, and I make this case in the book as well, that basically what we're talking about when we say physicality is space, time, and matter. Okay? So space is defined, the locations of space are defined by matter, which is like condensed space in the form of atoms and so on. And the space and time are simply ways of defining separation, because it's separate one point to another, one moment to the next, and so on. And so physicality, physical universes, and separation are actually the same thing. That our separation is the physical universe. So you would never have one without the other. You wouldn't have separation without physicality, or physicality without separation.
Ah, okay, that makes sense. So that we are on an eternal journey, then, so to speak, because it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like as separate. We will get to the point where we become one with our source.
Well,
but
yes, or we may get to the point where we become further from it. If you look at human history, that as you were saying, that as we've so-called, as other people may call it, developing, that we've become more sort of attached to machines and technology and less to each other as human beings, that we're actually getting further from each other. So the natural momentum that we've made is not taking us towards that light; it's taking us further from it. But that's not to say we can, as you say, we have free will, so we can say stop. We can recognize and be trailblazers for the value of all human beings. And I mean, if you look at, for example, there's plenty of examples you can take from human history. A very obvious one would be Dr. Martin Luther King, who he was living in a society that devalued human beings based on their appearance, and he stood up and he was a trailblazer to talk of the value of all human beings, and drew people's attention to that against the momentum of where the world was going, but pushing it towards a better way. So it's all about how much we can, each of us in our own lives can, as you say, be trailblazers towards unity and the recognition of the limitless potential of all humanity.
Is it possible that, of course it's possible, but is it possible that a single individual who has that spark within them, that they travel through time, gathering the ability to grow into the sense of unconditional love, that they don't go back, or that they don't finally see? This is my current philosophy, that the spirit goes lifetime to lifetime to lifetime, probably millions, maybe billions, maybe trillions of times, but then at some point becomes so pure, so perfected, that it becomes a source of consciousness, and then parts of it decide to be separate and go their separate ways, like our spirit did. So in other words, so we're not going back to a source, but we are in essence growing over time to become a source ourselves.
I think the point about the source state, the oneness state, is that it has no beginning. It can't begin. It can't be created. We can return to it by removing all shadows, so that we are just that light. But that light isn't beginning as such. Yet there is, in the Buddhist philosophy, they have the notion of the bodhisattva. It means someone who decides that they want to stay around in the physical universe and not go into nirvana or heaven or whatever you call it, but to keep coming back here to help be sort of there for the others, to help other people to learn. I'm not sure if perhaps that's what you're referring to, that some of these great teachers who have come and that maybe they didn't have to be here. Maybe they never actually reduced their state. They never took on shadow, or they had shadow but they undid it and became light. But then, as light, they choose to come back to help us. Perhaps, who knows?
Yeah, that was going to be another question. So that the spirit that was Jesus, that was Buddha, was that the same light energy, or were they different? Because I've heard a lot of people postulate that all of the major teachers were really the same light energy that was coming back time after time after time to help humanity. But
yeah, well, I mean, I think the point is that the more we become what we can be in full potential, then the hallmarks of identity, of specificity, of saying that you are that particular person or the other person becomes less important. So what matters more is about, they would perhaps have said, is what they're teaching, not about who they are or their particular sort of pasts or origins, because going back far enough, all of our origin is the same anyway, because we are all derived of that one light, and yet we each have our own individual patterns of darkness and shadow that we have made that make us less than that, but people such as those had less or no shadow.
So they came into this reality without any shadows, and that was free will. They chose to do that. It does. But wait, Jesus had shadows. Jesus had challenges. Jesus had dilemmas in which free choice, took place.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, that's the nature of being human, is to have challenges. But it's how we face those challenges. We either through light or through obscuring that light by making darkness and division. So I would make a case that in his life he sort of embodied the principles of that light, as opposed to the shadow that obscures it.
Well, it was also a time when there wasn't the technology that we have today. And yet the technology that we have today, we claim it as being, we are the most technologically advanced that the race has ever been, and yet they have the batteries that they have found that they found in shipwrecks over in the Aegean that were batteries, that were working computers. So,
there was the Antikythera mechanism was actually a computer that was around almost 2,000 years ago, way before Charles Babbage. Yeah.
Yeah, I just, it's sort of like every time we think we've developed something new, we find out that it really isn't new.
Well, I mean, the point is that I would argue that these technological things, whether or not however new they are, that they don't actually define our humanity. Definitely, they don't make our humanity anymore. It's our humanity is made more by our recognition of the value of humanity in ourselves and in others, to recognize that and live according to that recognition makes us more human. But having more advanced technology doesn't make us more human in itself. In fact, there's the danger, as I say, that if technology is not used wisely, then it can actually lead to human extinction.
Oh yeah, I mean, the cryogenics and everything that is going on is really quite profound. People that have frozen themselves right before the moment of death so they can be revived when the technology is such that they can be cured. And you know, it's a matter of, if you have enough money, you can do almost anything. But
as I say,
it's
like the problem with this belief in mind uploading. I would argue that it comes from as the species we're becoming more ignorant, and people associate their being, their identity, with the lump of flesh that they call their body, and they associate their mind with the pile of gelatinous substance in their skull that's called the brain, and think that they are just a pattern of electricity in that object, and so that they can just take the information from that and put it in a machine, and then they think that's them. So it's our blindness that could actually be our undoing. That when we lose sight of humanity and our humanity becomes superfluous and no longer needed, then the human species could disappear, not so much with a bang, but with a whimper. And people can stop it. They can stop it from happening in recognizing that humanity is something grander and eternal. That we don't need transhumanism. We don't need mind uploading. That we just need to fulfill our potential as human beings and recognize potential in all others.
It's a noble thought, for sure. A lot of people don't understand, and I have to, I kind of go along with the fact that it's something big to swallow, but that when I talk it, but it's hard to say I believe it totally, because it's hard to believe that though I am not a physical, my physicality does not represent the totality of my being. So that when my spirit, light body, energy, whatever you want to call it, leaves my body, it doesn't really leave as me. It leaves as a spirit that has total knowledge of everything that its journey has been on, and that which is me was only a brief moment in time.
Okay. Although, I mean, as I say, in people's, if we're to try to gather evidence of how we continue from in the near-death experiences, what people perceive, then generally speaking, they in their life review, because we're generally sort of mixtures of the two, of light and shadow, and that's what people sort of generally report, that they experience the kindness that they did to others as being done to them, and anything that they did that was negative, they feel that also. So the fact that we have come back into this physical world, and that we that we do have our each have our patterns of restriction and limit, does to me imply that yes, we do have the potential to be the all, but we don't automatically become that just through dying. That we need to achieve our steps towards becoming that light within our lifetime. It doesn't happen automatically. And of course, there are some people who have the negative near-death experiences as well, where they actually see darkness and suffering. Although many of those people, they find that also life-changing, because they realize that it does. They realize how some of their negative propensities were leading, and they see a way beyond that to go a different way.
So do we bring a pattern into the lifetime when we manifest?
I've always spoken of what I call, people talk about the nature versus nurture debate. They say, are you the more determined by your genes or by your environment? And I call it the nature versus nurture versus neither debate. That I believe that yes, each of your parents give you give you genetic material, but then you add something else to that of you that is defined by all of your experience that went up to that point when you came into that incarnation, all of your previous memories and actions, and that also defines what you are. You're not just a summary of your parents or your environment. You're a summary of what you bring in from your previous existence, and also what you make of your life with your free will in this one. So that those two aspects are what I would call the neither. That's not nature and it's not nurture.
So we don't, in other words, have a roadmap when we come in. It's
well,
all...
I would say, in a sense, we do have a momentum that we're following in our life that we bring with us, and maybe in the unconscious mind somehow there is a map of what we could do if we want to undo our limits, undo our shadow, and find the light. But it's just a case of whether or not and to what extent we find the opportunities or the choice to follow it or not.
Okay. Because, I've spoken with people that say, well, I made a contract that I was going to do this, and this when I came into this lifetime, or I was going to connect with this person or that person. And, and whatever somebody believes is fine. If that's their belief system, that's their belief system. I certainly wouldn't debate it. But I have personally, I have trouble thinking that that's the way it works. It makes greater sense that each individual, is guided, is to a certain degree. We are programmed by family and by culture and by religion and by what teachers teach us until we have the time, until we have the wisdom and the time and the ability to take on our own education if we so choose. So that
yes,
that's
definitely,
that's where free will comes in.
Sure. I mean, those things may definitely exert influence upon us, but you do get people who have a natural talent or ability, prodigies, for example, in music or science or anything else, that they somehow have something innately within them that not necessarily did their parents have or did their teachers have. And I think if we have no beginning but our line of ancestry, not in terms of parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, but our ancestry of us, of that stream of consciousness that we are now, has had previous lives and so on, then definitely I would expect that some of that we would bring in with us, and there is evidence for it in terms of children who have memories of a previous existence. They had no conscious way of knowing about it, but it later gets verified. That what they were saying is actually relates to a real individual who did actually live before.
Well, so how do you explain then, like you said, the prodigies or the idiot savants? Are these situations where so much has been built up in past lifetimes that it just pours into the current lifetime?
I mean, it might be. I don't know, but I would imagine that if after Mozart died, if he came back into life, I would be very surprised if he didn't have some innate musical talent in his next life that was there even before a teacher tried to guide him. Definitely, I suspect we do carry tendencies and of ways of being that do continue from from one lifetime to the next.
But wouldn't that then explain these teachers that come in, generationally or whatever, that they are on a pathway that is kind of leading them in that direction, like
yes,
Jesus,
that
Yeah,
that they've made that part. As you said, they've been trailblazers because they have chosen to follow that pathway that leads towards the light. It's interesting, actually, that although most references to reincarnation were removed from what's now known as the Gospels, there is one possibly that still remains. That when Jesus is talking to the apostles and they say, he was asking them, who do they say that I am? And what somebody says, well, some say that you can't be the Messiah because before the Messiah comes, Elijah has to return. And he said, I tell you, he did return, and people didn't recognize it. And the text says that they thought he was talking about John the Baptist. If that's the case, then that would mean that the prophet Elijah must have reincarnated as John the Baptist. So there's then a reference to the fact that Jesus and the apostles believed that such a thing as reincarnation did happen, you see. So it's interesting.
Well, absolutely, and I think in some place Jesus even indicates that he is the God of the Old Testament.
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, basically, I think what he says is that he says that he and the Father are one. And he says that the interesting thing about that, though, is that that it doesn't define himself as being the only one for whom God is the Father. In fact, he says that anyone who does my Father's will is my brother, my sister, and he says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. So he's basically identifying that all human beings have that potential to be like him if they live what he taught to the fullest extent.
Well, and he did say, all this and more will you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that, it was, he was in a human body. What he was doing was from a human perspective. And if he was human, then any human would have the same tools to work with, I guess is the best way to put it. So that what I find fascinating is that when he passed, I mean, it was his choice to pass. He could have turned his donkey around at any time, but he didn't.
Well,
and
the way I would put it, it's not that he chose to die, but he didn't walk away from it. He allowed it to be done to him, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, but he had the choice.
He did.
He could have kind of said, not this lifetime, I'll come back again in another time, and or he could have said, I'd rather be a fisherman, just I'm going that direction this lifetime, so that there was a destiny that he had, and I do believe that a lot of people have a destiny, and it's a matter of do you follow it this lifetime, or do you do it another lifetime? Do you choose to sit out a lifetime and just do nothing? I guess you can. There is free will. But
well, I think there is, but then the opportunity may no longer be there. The thing is that this is a world of diminishing returns with the second law of thermodynamics that breaks everything apart. So the longer we leave it, the less likely we are to be able to achieve full divestment of all darkness and shadow within us, so to speak. The longer we leave it just sort of waiting, the less likely it is that we'll make headway, I think.
Well, is free will though, really free, because we have the freedom to make the choices, but we still have to live with the outcome of those choices.
Yes, and that's what to me that's what freedom means. Freedom includes the fact that you have the capacity to make choices, and therefore you have the capacity to make consequences. And yes, you have to. Those consequences will affect you and others, for the better or not.
I think part of being human, and part that so many of us miss, is that every action that we make, not only affects us, but it affects other people as well. So it's sort of like an analogy similar to the butterfly. A ripple can become a tsunami, and if something you do appears to be so simple that it's inconsequential, it's not. There is a domino effect that can impact that old adage, for want of a nail, a horseshoe was lost for want of a horseshoe. The horse was lost for want of the horse. The rider was lost for, and it just snowballs into, reality changes. So yes. I think most people don't realize that everything they do affects everyone else. It's not just me. It's me and you and everybody else out there. And yes. I think humanity has a ways to go before it realizes that we are a family of man and woman. And it's a family, and yeah. You don't always like everybody in your family, but they're family, so you love them. And it's that kind of love that people don't understand. And it has to do with consciousness too. It has to do with awareness. It has to do with taking you out of the individual we and becoming part of a whole. And we have become isolated from that knowledge and that wisdom. And so not that I'm trashing religions, because I'm not. I think it's important to some people and they should have it. But the reality is that there are many ways back to the source, or to find the source within you. It doesn't have to be just one way. And that's where so many people get caught up. It's not a single chosen group. It's everybody. Yes,
absolutely. I often say that if you were to gather together all the great teachers of history, like Abraham, Jesus, Muhammad, the Buddha, Zoroaster, Guru Nanak, and so on, they're not going to be. They wouldn't see themselves as being representatives of different religions. They'd all be like brothers, and they'd all be actually referring to what they all agree is true. And it's just humanity through. We've made religions to divide ourselves up from each other. I often say that religion is the shadow. Religions are the shadows cast by mankind on the light of God. That the light is the same for all of us, but we each have our own way of demarcating sort of what's not light. And the problem is that we identify then the shadow. We confuse the shadow and the light, and people identify with an institution as being, and they sort of follow and worship the shadow instead of the light.
Well, and if you look at all major religions and even nonverbal religions, it all comes down to the golden rule. I mean, that's at the foundation of just about every, whether it's Native American, whether it's African, whether it's the big ones, Christianity and Judaism and Muhammad. I mean, it's do unto others. It's love thy neighbor as thyself. It all comes down to that one concept. And
yes.
people have created convoluted concepts around all of those principles to take you in different directions. But you're absolutely right. It really all is the same thing. It's founded on love.
Yes,
absolutely. But it's unconditional love as opposed to spiritual love, as opposed to a physical love, and that's where most people get confused. And it's the physical is of the physical realm, and we are essentially, while we happen to be in physical form now, our true identity is not in physical. This just happens to be a pair of clothes that we're wearing for this particular experience. I wonder, I guess we it's just sort of like, I don't think we have a choice, actually, as when we reincarnate. I don't think it's a matter of, check the boxes what you want to be and what your physical features are going to be and what your situation is going to be. You just sort of merge back into the whole process and get your memory to a degree wiped, and you're off on another experience and adventure, which is really very exciting.
Well, it may be exciting, but of course there's also a lot of suffering in the world as well. If you're born somewhere where you and your family are starving and so on. Definitely there is as long as there is humanity, there is the potential to achieve something limitless.
Do you believe that while as humans in human form, that this is our process, that in other parts of the universe, the galaxy, there are other entities that are flowing in the same direction?
There may well be, but of course the direction that we're flowing in, as I say, that the momentum of the world isn't to flow towards the light. The tendency is for us to get further into shadow once it's there. But that's not an inevitable thing that has to happen. That there is an antidote to it. But I think that the direction of that happens throughout the universe, that this is a universe that, as I say, governed by what's in science known as the second law of thermodynamics. Order always goes into greater and greater states of disorder. Things break down. They don't spontaneously become more ordered. We have, but there's limitless potential to retrace our steps to become what we were and what we can be, and to do so, as you say, we'd have to recognize the importance and value of all other human beings.
Well, with this journey that we're on, you're relating it basically to the Earth plane. Once we get to a point where, is there a point in time that we evolve to a different plane? Other dimensions, or is it just this dimension we seem to be locked into?
Well, I think if you trace, as I say, the case I make in the book is that consciousness is what makes time. So consciousness has no beginning. So we have come from a state beyond the Big Bang where all consciousness is one, and that's what people are looking towards when they see that light in near-death experiences, where there's all wisdom and all compassion. We have become less than that. We have taken on. We're not all light. We have shadow. We have ignorance. We have restriction, prejudice, and limitation that divides us from our fellow human beings, selfishness, and so on, nationalism, racism, all the things that divide, but that left to its own devices, if we follow those momentums that divide, then we become even less human. We, the survival of the human species could be in jeopardy, but that we can undo that restriction, and that's what, as you say, people like Buddha and Jesus and many others were showing a way of how that can be done to achieve the state that is our true home, our true origin that we have come from. So I don't see us in the physical universe as an evolutionary step towards something, another dimension, because dimensions are all about separation. You see, we have 3 dimensions of space that all define the separation of points, but the oneness that beyond the Big Bang isn't dimensional. It's not spatial, and you can't have space without dimensions or dimensions without space. So it's not about developing more dimensions. It's about developing our humanity and that part of us that can be eternal and infinite, and recognizing that in each other, and therefore achieving eternal existence and wisdom without needing dimensions, without needing time or space or evolution or any of those things.
So the shadows are greed and avarice and anger and cruelty, and those are the shadows you're talking about. So it's a matter of
things like that. Anything that divides, anything that separates human beings.
That's a tall order to cook up with the state of the world as it is now. I mean, if you look at just human history, there are very few years that there hasn't been war or conflict someplace on the planet.
That's right. So we don't have control over everybody in the world, but we have control over ourselves. That's, I think, where Gandhi made a great point when he said, "Be the change that you want to see in the world." And if you do that enough, and can be sufficiently a trailblazer as he was and many others have been, then you actually demonstrate a way of being that others can see and possibly emulate.
So this is really an awakening that at some point, theoretically, all living beings will get to this point, or is this a never-ending story?
You see, I don't. That's the problem, is that I don't think it is inevitable that we will go that way towards limitless, towards achieving our full potential. It's perfectly possible that people become even less, become more mechanized, go into technology, lose sight of humanity, and so on. That's the way that the world is going. That there's still so much starvation and suffering in the world, and that there's mountains of food that aren't being eaten, and so on. I think the tendency in human nature is if we don't wake up, that we do just follow on a path to further towards destruction. But that's not inevitable. Each human being has the power to recognize their limitless value and potential, and see that in all others also, and blaze a trail, as you say, going in the opposite direction to the way that the world seems to be moving.
It just seems as though, with the fact that our lifetimes are 120 years if we're lucky, that repeating this pattern over and over and over and over again does feel as though we're on a spiral of sorts, and it's a matter of we can only control ourselves. We can't control other people. So it's a matter of that awareness hitting enough people so that we change the course of humanity, the course of evolution. We have a long way to go.
Yeah.
When you look at it that way, it's sort of like, how do we ever win? How do we ever get to a place where we get to that point? I mean, I could even embrace, millions and millions of years of this, but it has to have a destination.
Yeah.
It can't just be.
So,
it can't just be limitless. I mean, there has to be, or can it be? Is there? It's sort of like centrifugal force. You get it going, and it just keeps going and going and going and going. Is this the destiny of humanity?
Well,
that we never, we never quite make it. I mean, it seems to me that there is hope that better times will be achieved.
Well, I mean, it's basically up to each human being, up to each of us, in how we live, to make it happen or not. So to follow blindly the momentum of the world that tends to devalue humanity, or that we revalue it, we recognize its value and live according to that, and make our spiral of coming back in other lifetimes each time, rather than becoming more ignorant, we can try to be wiser, if you see what I mean, until eventually you get to a point where you don't have any shadow anymore. You don't have to come back. Then, as you said, you might still choose to anyway to try and help the others.
Well, if we don't come back, where do we go?
Well, it's as I say, it's not really a where, it's not really a place. It is being itself, the beyond the Big Bang. It's not a place in space, because space is just the arena of our separation from each other. So it's what's on the other side of that light that people see in their near-death experiences. That even beyond that, total wisdom, total empathy and compassion, without any. You see, the problem is, because our minds are so cultured in terms of time. So eternity to us, we think of it like a statue that's never changing. But what we forget is that statue, we're watching it in time. But this is eternally within the now. Nothing needs to change, but it's already all potential all at once. It's difficult to find words to describe it, but we can logically sort of infer that that's what it would be.
Yeah, it's a ways away, that's for sure.
Sorry?
Yeah, it's not going to happen tomorrow, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
But religions, offer the hope of eternal this and eternal that, and I know that there is not a celestial rest home out there. I got that, but there has to be a purpose to the growth, and there has to be a purpose. There has to be a purpose to it.
Yeah.
Because I don't
the
believe.
Way
Go ahead.
Yeah, the way I see it is that what we see as existence, if we sort of equate existence with this physical universe and that we're in now, that is like the whole thing is like a tiny little dot compared to all of all of existence. That's the problem, is that we identify this as natural reality, but there is actually that, because we're seeing it in time and in space, but the fact that you're seeing it in time and space is because you're conscious, and your consciousness is bigger than physical universes. You already have eternity because you are a sentient being. You have eternity because time exists because of you. But it's just the question is in what way do you experience eternity? Is it in a world where you have to have material bodies made of flesh and decay and disease and death and suffering, or could it be that there's another state beyond that where none of those things are necessary, where you experience all of that love and wisdom forever without the need for change? So there wouldn't be dimensions to it. There wouldn't be space or need for time. But that is the logical inference of what is this. If we have no beginning, and yet the universe did have a beginning, then beyond that Big Bang, without needing time and space, then all sentience can exist in its full limitless potential in that state, and that is achievable.
Okay, it's just that in human form, in human consciousness, you kind of look at things and you say, okay, there's got to be a purpose, there's got to be an end game, there's got to be where do we go from here?
That might be what you define as your purpose, if you like. If once you recognize that potential in yourself and in all others, that the actual the purpose that you decide to make your purpose is the achievement of that state.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
With your investigation and knowledge of the Shroud of Turin, are there more investigations that are going to take place to try to carbon date it better or get more information from it?
Yeah, I do cover to some extent some of what went wrong with the carbon dating. Basically, I cite the research and discoveries of that were from a couple in the States called Sue Benford and Joe Marino, who discovered that the reason why the carbon dating came out with the medieval date is that the corner that the sample was taken from had been it was a corner that had been repaired and that consisted mostly of extraneous material that had been added to the shroud. Actually, Joe Marino has also written a book called Wrapped Up in the Shroud, where he talks about the history of what went wrong with the carbon dating and how he and his late wife discovered that. And he's actually got another book coming out shortly. But the problem is that you see that the shroud belongs to the Catholic Church, and they're not really allowing much access to it for scientists to do further research. There already has been some great research that was done earlier. So in the 1970s, the shroud was the property of the Duke of Savoy in Italy, and it was he who allowed the Shroud of Turin research project team in 1978 to do the scientific analysis of that. And this was scientists who, as you may know, came mostly from places like NASA, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Los Alamos, and so on. And as I think you alluded to at the start, that many of them, when they first went to study the shroud, they thought that they would go there, see the brushstrokes, as it were, in 5 minutes, and then they could go home again, because they just assumed that this was some kind of religious relic, which of course it isn't. It's an artifact, a historical artifact that has a huge amount of scientific information on it, and they discovered that actually they couldn't account for how the image on the cloth could have been fabricated. It couldn't have been sort of made by an artist or a forger. That actually the image doesn't consist of anything that's been added to the cloth, no paint or pigment, but actually is a chemical change to the outermost surface fibrils of the cloth, just 1/5000th of a millimeter in thickness. It's very similar to what happens when paper is exposed to sunlight, that you get that sepia discoloration of the paper. Well, this seems to have happened fibril by fibril on the cloth in one momentary event that formed the image as having photographic negative type properties and also distance coding, which implies that there may have been a burst of radiant energy that came from the body of the man, dead body of the man that was wrapped in the shroud. And this was a body that forensic pathologists have seen from studying the blood stains and so on, that someone who'd been whipped and tortured and crucified and had had a cap of thorns or sharp objects placed upon his head. So yes, and all of this is just from the scientific study of the shroud, and that was not what they were expecting when they agreed to be part of this research project, but it is what they discovered.
There's also another cloth that has the same kind of image on it. Has that been studied as well? That just has his face on it?
Actually, I believe there's not another cloth that has an image. I think you might be thinking of the Sudarium of Oviedo. It doesn't have an image, but it has blood stains on it, and some people think that there's some evidence that somebody called Mark Guskin has done some research that seems to show that the blood stains on the Sudarium align with the ones on the shroud, that this may have been placed on his head at some point during the burial process, and also had sort of stains from the blood. You see, the interesting thing is that at the time that the blood stains went on the cloth on the Turin shroud, we can see from looking at it forensically that he was already dead at that point. So he was dead when he was taken down from the cross after having been crucified, and laid down supine flat on his back when the shroud was wrapped around him. And then later, at some point, not too long after, because there's no putrefaction or decay in the body, it appears that body somehow came up off the slab and was upright and suspended above the ground when there was this burst of light that came from it. Now, this sounds like, people say it sounds like science fiction or so, but this is what the scientific evidence is actually pointing towards, that this actually happened.
Yeah, anything that I have read, certainly on the subject, it absolutely, that's the only way that you could get that kind of an image, because of it.
Yeah.
So, I firmly believe that this happened in this way, and that it's very sad to think that, hopefully someday you'll be allowed to carbon date some of the actual image just to get a carbon dating from that, because I know that they've taken they've done fiber, they tested out the pollen that was in the cloth and all sorts of other aspects that put it in the right place at the right time. Well, at the right place.
That's right.
Time is the only thing that they haven't been able to iron out yet.
Well, actually, to some extent, it does put it at the right time, because you see, there was some research done on the pollen by Professor Avinoam Danin, who was at the time he was a professor of botany at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and it shows that the shroud was exposed to the elements in the environs of Jerusalem either in March or April, because that's the time of the year that those pollens would have been in the air. Now, this is a victim of Roman crucifixion in the area of Judea around Jerusalem. And now, most of the time when the Romans were crucifying people, they just left them out to the elements to allow the animals to get to them and so on. Except there's the exception to that is between the years 6 and 66, when there was they had a figurehead from the local community who they allowed to have a little bit of power. And during that time, the Romans didn't agree to stop doing crucifixions, but they did allow their victims to have a proper Jewish burial. And a Jewish burial, for anyone who knows, is a quick burial. So they would have been taken down from the cross soon after they were dead to be buried. And this is what happened with the man of the shroud. So that says that this is a victim of Roman crucifixion between the years 6 and 66 AD, or Common Era, who was crucified in March or April, somewhere around Jerusalem. And particularly the interesting thing is that forensically, that uniquely, the cap of sharp objects on his head, which pertain specifically to at least the anecdotal reports of what happened to the particular individual, Jesus of Nazareth. So, that there are many things that actually point to this being his personal burial cloth.
It's fascinating, and the further you go into it, the more it opens you up to the philosophy that got him there, and what created the image, because obviously it was some sort of burst of consciousness, and it doesn't necessarily have had to be light, but it was a burst of energy for sure. And of course,
well,
light
in fact,
is what
Well, it was it's actually empirical evidence that points to there having been a burst of light, and this is based on work done by Dr. Paolo Di Lazzaro's team in the Atomic Energy Institute in Italy, that they found that they can reproduce certain aspects of the microscopically and chemically of the change in the surface fibrils that forms the image by using short, intense bursts of ultraviolet laser. They calculated that to do such a thing technologically would require hundreds of billions of watts of lasers, which they don't even have in modern technology. But I'm not suggesting, of course, and I don't think they are either, that the shroud was produced technologically, but that somehow, as you mentioned earlier, this was a natural thing that happened. And I would say, and I do make the case in the book, that it happened naturally as a consequence of how he lived his life and who he made himself to be, and how it showed the potential of what all other human beings can be also.
A great note to end on. I just noticed the time, and we're out of it. I so thank you for being here and sharing your information and your insight and your wisdom with us. And if people want to find your book, it is on Amazon, and it's also on Kindle. So I highly, it's the kind of book, you really have to read more than once, I believe, and kind of stretch yourself into it. Your information is fabulous, and I thank you so much for being with us today.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on the show. Yes, the book's called A Burst of Conscious Light, and people can find links to it if they go to my website, which is andrewsilverman.co.uk.
Okay, well, thank you very much again, and thank you everybody for listening. This will be up on YouTube later on today. And if you haven't signed up to subscribe to our channel, please do so. Thank you very much, Mark, for helping out today, and thank you, Andrew, for being with us.